Today's daf is daf Ayin Dalid, and we're going to begin with V'chol Hecha, and that's about 15 lines down from the top of the Amud, and the first word of the line is La. The Gemara at the beginning of this parak had raised the following question. Why is it that the Mishnah tells me that Achila and Shasiya on Yom Kippur is Asur? It's much more worse than Asur because the word Asur indicates that there's some sort of violation, but it doesn't tell me that it reaches the level of a Chiv Kares. And the Torah says with regard to Yom Kippur, Nefesh Shelo Seuna, B'nichrisa. The Mishnah should have used the word Chayav to indicate that he's Chayav Kares. So now the Gemara objects to the objection. The Gemara now rejects the premise that underlies the objection of the Gemara. Are you telling me that the word asur is totally inappropriate for something that's chayiv kares? Vasanya, what are we going to do with the brisa that interprets our Mishnah and says that afal pisha amru, even though the Mishnah says asur bikulan, which means all 5 categories of inui are prohibited on Yom Kippur, and we would assume, until we knew otherwise, that they're all equal, they all are a similar or a severe isa that generates an isa kares. No, lo amru anish kares ela ala ocha v'shose v'ose malacha bilvad. The Brisa says that the word asur in our Mishnah should not be taken in a uniform way, because with regard to Achil and Shasiya, and only with regard to Achil and Shasiya, does the word Asur mean Chayav Kares. With regard to the balance of the Inuyim, they're not Chayav Kares. And you see clearly from this Brisa that the Lashon, the language Asur, that term means that it's Asur B'Achil and Shasiya, even though it's Chayav Kares. So we see that we're very comfortable with using the term Asur to refer to a Chiv Kares. The Gemara answers no. Hachi Karma, this is what the Bryce has in mind. Kisha Amru, when they said in the Mishnah that as far as Inu and Yom Kippur is concerned, Asur means that it's not Chayiv Kares. Lo Amru Ella Bechatzi Shir. If he eats less than a full shir, he's not Chayiv Kares. Al Kishir Anush Kares. So we see that the word Asur here in this Brisa means that there's no chiyuv kares, and we're talking about a case where he ate a chatzi shir. Afal pikein anush kares ein anush kares ela ochel v'shosa v'yosem malach bilvad. If he had eaten a full shir, or he drank a full shir, then he'd be chayiv kares. Or if he did malach on Yom Kippur, he's chayiv kares. But with regard to other inuyim, he's not going to be chayiv kares even in a full shir. But the word asur, says the Brisa, the way we're interpreting the Brisa now, refers to Chatzi Shir. Now the Gemara had asked that the Lashon of Asur is l'chora not, it doesn't imply a Chiyuv Kares, and the Gemara answered no, that we're talking about a case of Chatzi Shir, and therefore he's not Chayiv Kares, and that's why the Mishnah utilizes the word Asur. Now the Gemara offers a second answer. Alternatively, by Ema, we could answer that in truth, the Mishnah is not talking about Chatzi Shir, it's talking about a Shir Shalom. And even though with regard to Achil and Shasiya, the word should have been that he's Chayiv Kares instead of using the word Asur, Kikari Asur, why does the Mishnah insist on employing the term Asur, even though it's a Chayiv Kares? It's a Shara, it's a reference to the other Inuyim, other than Achil and Shasiya. They don't incur a Chayiv Kares. So when the Mishnah mentions Achil Shasiya at the beginning, it's only to teach me that other Inuyim are going to be derived, as we'll see later on, from the Iser Inui of Achil Shasiya. But the word Asur per se in the Mishnah is not describing Achil Shasiya. That's a Chiv Kares. But rather it's describing the balance of the Inuyim, the other 4 categories of Inuyim. The Tani, Rabba, Rabbi Yosef, B'shar Sifrei Debei Rav. We have other brisos, and they say, Minayim liyom kippurim shasu b'chitza sicha v'nilas san tashvan mita Talmud lomar Shabbos Shabboson hi lachem v'nisem es nafsho seichem Shvos, which means that in Parshas Vizos, in Parshas Achremos, when the Torah describes Yom Kippur and the Isser Ina of Yom Kippur, uses the word Shabboson. Shabboson means Shvus. Shvus means to expand the scope of the Isser. So that even though the real Isser of Yom Kippurim with regard to a Chiv Kares is Achil Chasiya, not the other, but because of Shvos, it's coming to expand from Achil Chasiya to include other categories of Inui. They are not on the same level as Achil Chasiya. They do not generate a Chiv Kares. Now we go back to an issue of what's called Chatzi Shir. What happens? How does the Torah view Chatzi Shir? Chatzi Shir, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, awesome in a Torah. Even though there's no Onesh and there's no Chiv Kares, but nevertheless you violated the Torah with Chatzi Shir. Reish Lakish Amar, mutum in a Torah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, awesome in a Torah. Now let's keep in mind that the Gemara now is going to offer what I call Roman numeral number 1, a first interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan, in this first interpretation, is based on Tzvara. Later, the Gemara is going to get to Roman numeral number 2, an alternative understanding of Rabbi Yochanan, that he has a Yalfusa and he derives it from the Torah. But now we're going with Tzvara. What is the Svara to say that the Torah prohibits even Chatzi Shir? Even the Chazil Tarufe, Isura Ka'achil. If he would eat a Chatzi, let's say Zayis, and then eat another Chatzi Zayis, he'd be chayav for a full shear of a Kizayis. So when he eats a Chatzi Zayis, he's certainly eating Isur. Again, it would be impossible, says Rabbi Yochanan, to postulate logically that he's not eating Isur, and yet you could be mitzaref for another Chatzi Shir, and he'd be chayav. How could you do such a thing? He's not even eating Isur. It must be that he's eating Isur. And the Torah prohibited Isur. Now, exactly what Chazil Tzarufe means is a gigantic machlokas achronim. For example, let's say a person would eat a Chatzi Shir at the very last second before Shkia on Yom Kippurim, in such a way that it's impossible for him within that fraction of a second to be mashlim and be mitzaref for another Chatzi Shir. Would Rabbi Yochanan say in that case the Chatzi Shir is mutam in Torah? Or does it mean conceptually, theoretically, in the abstract world, it's chazil, it's tarufe? It doesn't have to be chazil, it's tarufe in this particular case and in this scenario. Reish Lakish Amar mutam in Torah, achila amar achman of aleka. The Torah prohibits achila, and we have a principle that ein achila pachos mikizayis. If he eats less than a kizayis, that's not called achila. So it's true, you might call it a cheftzid surah because it's chazil, it's tarufe, as Rabbi Yochanan would argue, but nevertheless, you have to have a maisa avera. The maisa avera is achila. There's no achila in Chatzi Shir. Esvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. And now we're going to learn a parsha in Vayikra Perek Zayin. Kol chelev shar v'kesev v'ez lo sochelu. Ki kol ochel chelev min behema. V'nichras ha-nefesh ochel es me'ameh. Chelev behema is asur with an isur kares. And the Brisa says that the Torah writes the isur al-achilas chelev and its punishment one next to the other in the same verse. Ainly elakol sheyeshno bi onesh, yeshno b'azhara. Now I would say that the azhara, the prohibition that says lo sol chelu, refers to that amount of chelev where you are chayav kares. However, Chatzi Shir, hoil v'yeno ba'onesh, it certainly is not considered included in the chiyuv kares. And now we have another case called koi. Koi is a kind of a living animal, and we don't know if it's a chaya or it's a behema. If it's a behema, then the chelev of koi is included in the isra achila of chelev. If on the other hand it's a chaya, then it's not included in the isra chelev. It's mechayev what's called kisi adam, but it's not chayev b'tor's chelev. is hoil v'eno b'kares. In the case of koi, he's not going to be chayiv kares because it's a suffix whether or not it's chaylev of a behema or not. Maybe the koi is a chayiv, not a behema. He's not chayiv kares for eating a chatzi shear of chaylev. Is now yochel, I might entertain the possibility that eno b'azhara, that the Torah permits it. It's not included in the azhar because the Torah writes the onich and the azhar in the same breath. Talmud Lomar kol chaylev. There's an extra word in this pasuk kol chaylev. And the word kol is always a ribui, and in this case, it's a ribui for something that's like chaylev. It's not exactly chaylev, but it's an auxiliary chaylev, and it's also bachila, and that would be chatzi shir or koi. Anyway, it's clear from this brayso that chatzi shir is also min Torah. Here, Rabbi Yochanan is going to base himself on this brayso, not deriving it from the svara of chazi litztarufe, but rather from the alfusa of kol chaylev. But in any event, this is difficult according to Reish Lakish, who holds that chatzi shir is mutar in Torah. And the Gemara answers, midrabanan ukra asmachta b'alma. When this brisa tells me that is an iser to eat chatzi shir of chaylev and derives it from the word kol, that's not a drasha gemura, that's an asmachta. And the entire enterprise, the entire injunction against eating chatzi shir of chaylev is midrabanan with an asmachta. Again, it's a little bit difficult to fit this into the brisa because the brisa says yeshno bazhara or eno bazhara. I mean, that sounds like a doraisa, not a drabana. The Gemara says hachinami mistabra. The Gemara wants to prove Reish Lakish is correct that this brisa with the word kol is not referring to a drasha gemura, but rather to a smachta. The isal kedaitach, if you're going to entertain the possibility that chatzi shir is also midoraisa, and the drasha of kol chaylev is a drasha gemura, is kai sveku. Why would I need a drasha to teach me that kai is asur bechaylev? It's a suffix chai, a suffix behema. It's a krol asuye spika. Do I need a pasuk to tell me that in case we have a suffix chaylev, it's asur? Of course it's asur. Suffix doraisa lechumra. The drasha must be an asmachta. And if it's an asmachta with regard to kai, we can logically assume that it's an asmachta with regard to chatzi shir as well. And it's only asur rabbanon, and that supports Reish Lakish. The Gemara rejects this proof. Imishum ha lo iria. This is not a proof. It's possible to deflect this proof and insist that the drasha of the brisa is a drasha gemura, and chaylev in the case of koi, and of course chatzi shir is also midoraisa. You'll ask me, why does the brisa need kol as a ribui doraisa to include koi? Isn't koi a case of a suffix chai, a suffix behema, and therefore its chaylev is certainly also even without a pasuk? And the answer to the Gemara is kasavar or kasavri. This Tana the brisa holds, and here we're on the top of Daf Ayin Daled Amid Beis. Koi bria bifnei atzmahi.